with the respect was given primarily to those who had acquired wealth, as opposed to those who had simply inherited it. The character of Okonkwo in the book Things Fall Apart by renowned
House
historian
Masters.
Chinua Achebe was in many ways the perfect illustration of the uniquely Igbo vision. By contrast, the majority Muslim Hausa Fulani, which represented about 65% of the northern population, had lived for many years in feudal societies in which large working-class populations were ruled by a small theocratic elite composed of emirs and sultans. As their political leaders often doubled as religious leaders, compliance and submission to the will of the political establishment was not simply a civic duty, but a religious one. Very much unlike in Igbo societies, there was nothing particularly odd or shameful about a man aspiring to live a modest life as a farm worker, craftsman, or a nomadic cattle herder. But contrary to commonly held prejudices, the Hausa Fulani were not in any way lazier or inherently less enterprising than their southern counterparts. They simply had a deeper appreciation for religious discipline and had a more socially conservative worldview. However, there is no denying the fact that while the unquestioning submissiveness of northern societies to the theocratic establishment guaranteed internal stability and order, it also meant that the north was a lot less economically vibrant. Northerners were generally less open to new ideas and often completely rejected secular education in favor of Islamic education. Demonstrating the extent of Nigeria's north-south divide, some studies estimated that as at Nigeria's independence in 1960, northern Nigeria had an English literacy rate of just 2%, compared to the southeast, which had an English literacy rate of 19.2%. The Yorubas, which formed about 75% of Nigeria's southwestern population, were in many ways a sort of halfway house between the Igbos and the Hausa Fulani, both in terms of their religious affiliation and their political history. Although also majority Christian, they nevertheless had significant populations of Muslims as well as followers of the ancient Yoruba religions. In simple terms, the traditional Yoruba political structure was basically less autocratic than the Hausa Fulani, but not as democratic as the Igbo. For centuries, Yoruba societies were ruled by kings known as Obas, who governed in close consultation with chiefs, priests, and priestesses. Culturally, the Yorubas were quite similar to the Igbo in their appreciation for individual drive and ambition. However, the Yorubas tended to channel their energies towards excellence in the arts and academia, as opposed to pure industry and wealth creation. Many often point to the Yorubas' deep appreciation of the arts as the reason why many of Nigeria's most prominent cultural icons, such as Afrobeat legend Fela Kuti and the Nobel Prize laureate Professor Wole Soyinka, have been of Yoruba ancestry. But to say that the differences between Nigeria's three main tribes meant that every Igbo, Yoruba, or Hausa Fulani person hated anyone who wasn't from their tribe would be very far from the truth. In reality, most Yoruba societies got on well enough with Igbo societies. The main culture clash, if you like, was between the Hausa Fulanis of the north and the two major ethnic groups of the south. Prior to the colonial era, ancient Yoruba kingdoms such as the Oyo Empire had for many years suffered under several waves of jihadi attacks by the Islamic Sokoto Caliphate of the north, led by the famous Sultan Uthman Dan Fodio. Now, although the Igbos did not have a similar history of warring with the Hausa Fulani, the British colonial enterprise would create the perfect environment for the sharp differences between these two tribes to be brought to the forefront. In 1914, British High Commissioner Frederick Lugard effectively created the country we know today as Nigeria by bringing the northern and southern regions together in the now infamous Nigerian Amalgamation of 1914. Till this very day, the feeling amongst many Yoruba and Igbo historians is that one of the main purposes of this amalgamation was to place the more affluent South under the control of the autocratic North. The theory goes that by joining the more educated and therefore less controllable southern region to the much larger northern region, the British government was better able to implement its policy of indirect rule, as the amalgamation essentially gave dominion over the entire country to the northern elites, who were significantly less rebellious and generally more amenable to British interests. It is also worth noting that from 1914 onwards, the British adopted a practice of placing northerners in key leadership positions within the colonial administration. Despite being generally better educated, southerners were more often than not limited to managerial and executive roles within the colonial apparatus. When the struggle for Nigeria's independence began to take shape, it was mainly Yoruba and Igbo intellectuals such as the political activist Fumi Ransom Kuti and the renowned jurist Jaja Wachuku that led the fight for Nigeria's sovereignty. According to some historians, many of the northern elites, were not at all welcoming to the idea of an independent Nigeria, as they feared that independence would mean losing the privileged positions that they had enjoyed under the colonial structure. The story goes that as a condition for them agreeing to support the push for Nigeria's independence, the northern leadership specifically demanded that the new nation maintain its colonial political structure. And even though it pretty much guaranteed a continuation of the North's dominance, the Igbo and Yoruba leaders, in their desperation to gain independence at all costs, agreed to the North's demands. And so upon its independence on the 1st of October 1960, the Nigerian state was divided into three geopolitical regions, in which a disproportionately large northern region was united with two smaller eastern and western regions. Nigeria's British-style parliamentary government was led by its first and only Prime Minister, Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the northern co-founder of his political party, the Northern People's Congress. Tafawa Balewa's NPC party governed in coalition with the Igbo-aligned National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, which was led by Nigeria's Governor-General, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the man who would later go on to serve as the ceremonial president of the First Nigerian Republic, which was established in 1963. The Yoruba-aligned Action Group Party, which was headed by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, played the opposition role. If unity was the goal, then the Nigerian state had gotten off to a very bad start. Nigeria's parliamentary system was a bit of a farce, as Nigeria's three main parties were not built around ideology, but on ethnic nationalism. With the vast majority of Nigeria's general population still largely unfamiliar with the Western-style democratic system of their new country, pretty much everyone voted based on ethnicity. The Southwesterners voted for the AG, the Southeasterners for the NCNC, and the Northerners for the NPC. And as the northern region was by far the largest constituency, the NPC was basically guaranteed control over Nigeria, as none of the other two parties could compete with the NPC's large northern voting base. As you can imagine, it was only a matter of time before the shoddy foundations on which the Nigerian state had been built began to show serious signs of strain. The entrepreneurial spirit of the Igbos would see many of them move out of their hometowns in search of all the opportunities their new nation had to offer. From Lagos to Benin, Port Harcourt, and even major northern cities like Kano and Kaduna, Igbos began to build businesses and pioneer new industries in the places they migrated to. But as is often the case with successful immigrants, it wasn't long before many of the locals, especially in the north, began to feel more than a bit uncomfortable with the success of their new neighbors.
One thing I've noticed, Premier, while I've been here, is that Northerners seem to have, I might almost call it obsession about the Igbos. Could you perhaps explain that to me?
Well, the Igbos are more or less the type of people whose desire is mainly to dominate everybody. If they go to a village, to a town, they want to monopolize everything in that area. If you put them in a labor camp as a laborer, within a year they will try to emerge as headman of that camp, and so on. Well, in the past, our people were not alive to their responsibilities. As you can see from our northernization policy, that in 1952, when I came here, there weren't 10 northerners in our civil service here. Then I tried to have it northernized, and now all important posts are being held by northerners.
Is this policy of filling all key posts in the north solely with northerners and not with other Nigerians a temporary or permanent one?
In actual fact, what it is a northerner first. If you can't get a northerner, then we take an expatriate like yourself on contract. If we can't, then we can employ another Nigerian, but on contract too. This is going to be permanent, I should say, as far as I can foresee, because it will be rather dangerous to see the number of boys who are now turning from all our learning institutions coming out with having no work to do. I'm sure whichever government of the day might be it will feel rather embarrassed, and it might even lead to bloodshed.
Doesn't this damage the idea, sir, of all people in all regions in Nigeria being fellow citizens of one country?
Well, it might, but you are, new to our region, but how many northerners are employed in the east or in the west? The answer is no. And if there may be 10 laborers employed only in the two regions.
It was against this backdrop of rising anti-Igbo sentiment in the north that the chain of events that ultimately led to the Civil War would begin to unfold. By as early as the year 1966, most Nigerians had already begun to resent the ruling elite for their lavish lifestyles and lack of sensitivity to the concerns of the masses. Rumors about vote rigging, corruption, and backdoor deals between politicians and foreign companies began to spread, and there was a general sense of discontentment in the air. Deciding that enough was enough, Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogu, an Igbo officer in the Nigerian army, instigated a revolutionary coup against the federal government. This coup would see the assassination of the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello, as well as the Premier of the Western Region, Chief Samuel Akintola. But rather suspiciously, the President, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, would manage to escape the bloodbath as he was out of the country on holiday when the coup took place. But despite the execution of many key members of the government, the coup led by Major Nzeogu was ultimately unsuccessful, as it was quashed by a different faction of the Nigerian army, led by Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, who, interestingly enough, was also of Igbo ancestry. After managing to secure the surrender of the coup plotters, Aguiyi Ironsi was declared military head of state. But even though both the instigator and the stopper of the coup were of Igbo descent, various conspiracy theories began to spread in the north, suggesting that the entire thing was all part of an undercover master plan to put General Aguiyi Ironsi in power and transfer control of Nigeria over to the Igbos. Oddly enough, there was actually a fair bit of evidence in support of this theory. 4 out of 5 of the coup plotters were Igbo, and although Aguiyi Ironsi stopped the coup, he did not execute any of the coup plotters. To make matters worse, no significant Igbo leader was killed in the coup. President Nnamdi Azikiwe had avoided all the drama thanks to his suspiciously timed holiday, while Michael Okpara, the Premier of the Eastern Region, had also managed to survive the coup, even though he did end up losing his job to Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, the man who would later go on to lead Biafra's attempt to break away from Nigeria. These anti-Igbo conspiracy theories would eventually grow from mere rumor and conjecture to an article of faith in the minds of many Northerners. And on the 29th of July 1966, a group of Northern Army officers instigated a counter-coup against the Ironsi administration. Unlike the previous one, this coup was successful. Major General Aguiyi Ironsi was assassinated, and Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a Northerner, was installed as Nigeria's new military head of state. Unfortunately, the northern retaliation would not end there. In the 3 months following the coup, an estimated 8,000 to 30,000 Southeasterners living in the north would be attacked, killed, and robbed by local mobs. Fearing for their lives, over 1 million Southeasterners fled back to their homelands, leaving behind businesses, homes, churches, and in some unfortunate cases, children that had been the fruit of inter-ethnic marriages. With the deluge of refugees flooding back into the eastern region with shocking stories of betrayal and trauma, the Nigerian project was on the brink of collapse. As many Easterners no longer felt safe in other parts of Nigeria, the military governor of the Eastern region, Colonel Ojukwu, began to call for Igbos from all around Nigeria to return home. Rumors about the Eastern region's impending breakaway from Nigeria became front-page news after it was reported that a plane carrying imported weapons had crashed in the eastern city of Enugu. Knowingly or unknowingly, Colonel Ojukwu essentially confirmed all rumors with a series of rousing criticisms of the Gowon administration's failure to provide adequate protection to the thousands of Igbos who were being attacked and killed by people they imagined were their fellow citizens. With tensions at an all-time high, General Yakubu Gowon and other key members of the government agreed to meet with Colonel Ojukwu at a neutral location so that both sides could try to de-escalate the situation. This two-day meeting will take place in the Ghanaian town of Aburi from the 4th to the 5th of January 1967. To Gowon's great surprise, Colonel Ojukwu took the meeting very seriously and was very well prepared. He set out very clearly all of the Eastern region's demands, which included greater political autonomy, greater control over the revenue from the Southeast oil deposits, and also a restructuring of the Nigerian army in a way that devolved powers to the regions and got rid of the unfair recruitment quota system, which had allowed for a disproportionately large number of northerners to join the Nigerian army. Although many still debate what exactly was agreed at this meeting, General Ojukwu left Aburi fully convinced that Gowon had accepted all of the Eastern region's demands. This controversial agreement, known today as the Aburi Accord, was not honored by the Gowon administration. Upon returning to Nigeria, General Yakubu Gowon decided instead to break Nigeria's regions into smaller states and turn Nigeria into an American-style federation composed of 12 states. Except unlike in the American system, each state had very little autonomy and very little control over its own resources. For many in the southeast, this was the last straw. With the Gowon administration having put its cards on the table, Colonel Ojukwu's mind was made up. He proceeded to consult with the various chiefs and traditional rulers of the eastern region, and on the 30th of May 1967, Ojukwu officially announced the secession of the eastern region and the establishment of the state of Biafra. And with the support of many key members of the southeastern leadership, Colonel Ojukwu cut all ties with the Nigerian army and was proclaimed General Ojukwu, Biafran President and Commander-in-Chief of the Biafran Army. The declaration of Biafra's secession was celebrated in the streets. For many, the establishment of Biafra was a long-awaited restoration of the pre-colonial sovereignty of the region and the beginning of a bright new dawn for its people. But unfortunately, the celebrations would be short-lived, as the Nigerian government's response was to declare war on Biafra. And although the Biafran army had no air force, no navy, and a chronic shortage of weapons and manpower, General Ojukwu was surprisingly optimistic about his new nation's ability to withstand the Nigerian army.
If civil war comes, and I do think it is imminent, you're quite right, it will for us be the price of freedom. Our people here have for a long time been prepared for this eventuality, and I am confident of their readiness. I think that when it does come, that the people on the other side would be surprised as to what they're going to get. And I'm confident that it will not last long. I can't say for certain what Lagos has got. When we lost direct contact with Lagos, they had some 4 battalions, ill-equipped, and I know that they have been purchasing a lot of arms since, and I know that they have negotiated and received a few armored vehicles, Prior to that, they had some scout cars. I know they have tried to get planes. I am not sure they have got them there. But on our side, we too have not been sitting quietly. There has been quite a lot of build-up. And I think what I have here is sufficient to maintain the integrity of Biafra and more.
But putting aside General Ojuku's confident fighting talk, the reality of the matter was that Biafra was by far the underdog in this fight. The Nigerian military was larger, better funded, better trained, and had secured the support of Britain and other world powers. The expectation in Lagos was for the war to be over within a matter of weeks, or in the very worst case scenario, 6 months. But much to the surprise of the Nigerians, the Biafran army would prove a lot more resilient than they could have ever imagined. Despite being composed of a largely untrained and unskilled group of young men and teenage boys, the Biafrans would manage to withstand the Nigerian onslaught for 3 brutal years. The early campaigns of the Nigerian forces were quite successful, as they quickly managed to reclaim significant Biafran cities and monuments. But after nearly a year of fighting, the war reached a stalemate as the Biafran army began to stand its ground and maintain control of key cities and towns. Within the nation itself, the civilian population tried to carry on living life as normally as they could. With most of the men and boys on the battlefront, it was up to the women to manage the day-to-day running of the country. But as the war raged on, any hopes that the civilian population had of continuing to live their normal lives began to fade away. With both sides unable to reach an agreement, despite several attempts at peace talks, including one in Ethiopia presided over by Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie, the Gowon administration came to the very reckless conclusion that the only way to break the deadlock would be to trigger its nuclear option. The Gowon-led forces mobilized to impose an economic blockade on Biafra, which blocked the flow of all food and ammunition supplies by land, air, and sea. This move would turn out to be perhaps the single most destructive political decision in West African history, as it would ultimately lead to the death by malnourishment of an estimated 2 million civilians, most of whom were children suffering from the protein deficiency disease known as kwashiorkor. You see, prior to the war, dietary protein in the Biafran diet primarily consisted of locally sourced seafood, as well as dried stockfish, which was imported from Norway. Other sources of protein such as chicken, pork, and beef were generally only enjoyed on special occasions, as they were often too expensive for the wider population. But as the blockade prevented the importation of Norwegian stockfish, and also restricted the local fishermen's access to the seas, the region's protein supplies were quickly depleted, and the national diet was reduced to almost 100% starch. As the war took place around the golden era of TV media, the images of millions of malnourished Biafran children projected on TV sets worldwide would be one of the global community's earliest introductions to the now infamous trope of the starving African child. Although the Nigerian government strategy was indefensible, it is important to point out that the government's supposed reasoning at the time was that the blockade would be nothing more than a short, sharp shock, and that General Ojukwu, seeing the immense suffering of his people and the dwindling ammunition of his frontline soldiers, would have no other choice but to surrender. However, what the Nigerians had failed to realize was that the Biafran state had secured the support of a foreign benefactor of its own. Although the only countries to publicly recognize the state of Biafra were Tanzania, Gabon, the Ivory Coast, Zambia, and Haiti, Charles de Gaulle's France had taken a secret interest in Biafra as it saw it as the perfect addition to its sphere of influence in West Africa. According to French President Charles de Gaulle, Biafra was a just and noble cause, and so working closely with the French-aligned governments of the Ivory Coast under President Félix Houphouët-Boigny and the Gabonese Republic, led by President Omar Bongo, the French government helped to prolong the war by providing Biafra with weapons, mercenary fighters, and as much food as could be smuggled past the Nigerian blockade. France also publicized Biafra's cause on the international stage, describing the situation as nothing short of a genocide. The eventual discovery of France's involvement in the war would lead to protests on the streets of Lagos, with many accusing the French government of being the real reason why the war had continued, despite the fact that the Biafran forces had very little chance of overcoming the Nigerian military. But did France really get involved in the war simply because Charles de Gaulle considered Biafra to be a just and noble cause? Well, not exactly. France's involvement was all about economics and had very little to do with some romantic desire for the Biafran people to share in the French ideals of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Later investigations will show how the French state-owned oil company ELF had secured lucrative drilling agreements with the Biafran state. Had Biafra successfully seceded from Nigeria, these agreements would have guaranteed ELF access to the equivalent of 7% of Nigeria's oil supply and given the French government a nice slice of the Nigerian pie, which since the discovery of oil back in 1956 had been enjoyed solely by the Shell BP oil company. Although the French government tried to keep its ties to Biafra secret, General Ojukwu did very little to hide his country's French connection. From as early as the first year of the war, General Ojukwu had already begun to suggest that French would be made compulsory in Biafran secondary, technical, and teacher training schools. In his own words, he was very keen for his people to benefit from the rich culture of the French-speaking world. As the death toll began to rise exponentially, the whole world was becoming more aware of the level of carnage and immense suffering of the Biafran people. The Nigerian diaspora was galvanized, and protests and counter-protests began to take place on the streets of London and New York. Some Nigerians blamed General Ojukwu for the deaths of his own people, arguing that by continuing in a war that he knew fully well he could not win, he was putting his personal ambition ahead of the lives of millions of people. But for many in the Biafran diaspora, the economic blockade was nothing short of a vicious genocide aimed at exterminating the Igbo people once and for all. Another accusation that was thrown at General Ojukwu was that the only way he managed to cajole his army and his people to continue in the fight for Biafra was by reporting stories of false victories and by giving false guarantees about the imminent end of the war. On the Nigerian side, the government continued to double down on its position. Despite reports of horrific levels of death and suffering, the Gowon-led government refused to blink first and continued to accuse General Ojukwu of killing his own people by lying to them about their chances of winning the war.
I do not wish to say anything on this occasion that might be regarded as prejudicial to the peace talks now going on in Kampala, Uganda. But in the words of Mr. Asika, the rebel leaders ought to know when enough is enough. They should call a halt to the shameless deception of innocent Igbos with reports of fictitious victories on the battlefronts. They should appreciate that the so-called diplomatic recognition by dubious characters cannot, in the least, alter the course of Nigerian history It is sheer wickedness for Ojukwu and his clique to continue to goad innocent citizens to support rebellion and lay down their lives for a cause that is not just. The rebel leaders know in their hearts of hearts that all their false propaganda about genocide and massacre derives from personal ambition and the haunting fear of their own future and safety. Consequently, they do not know when to stop. I call on those who claim to love Nigeria and the Igbos to face realities and advise the people of the East Central State to lay down their arms and return to the fold. It is not enough for organizations and individuals to ask the federal government to cease hostilities while ignoring the evil intentions of the rebels. I honestly believe it is in the true interest of the Igbos that they return to the fatherland. I am satisfied that all other Nigerians have learned the lesson of our most recent history and the current civil war. And I pray to God that there will never be a repetition.
You see, contrary to popular belief, the Biafran government was much more than just a rebel military force. General Ojukwu also assembled a group of elite writers and artists who were tasked with cultivating nationalist spirit at home and also spreading Biafra's message on the world stage. Political cartoons were put up all around the country, pushing simplistic interpretations of the causes of the war and demonizing not just the Nigerian military, but the Nigerian populace at large. On the international stage, notable members of the Biafran apparatus, such as Chinua Achebe and Gabriel Okara, publicized the plight of the Biafran people. They regularly denounced the actions of the Nigerian government and spoke about the atrocities they had witnessed in the country. The Biafran story became front-page news, and more members of the international community began to call on their own governments to take action. On the 29th of May 1969, Bruce Mayrock, an American student at Columbia University, set himself on fire at the United Nations headquarters in New York, in protest of what he believed was a genocide against the nation and people of Biafra. He was pronounced dead the very next day. With more and more of their own citizens calling for political intervention, the response from Nigeria's international backers was to ramp up their military support for the Nigerian forces, to help them break the Biafran resistance once and for all. With their increased firepower, the Nigerian Federal Forces launched another major attack on the Biafran defense in the last week of December 1969. This final offensive, known as Operation Tailwind, was executed by a battalion led by Colonel Olusegun Obasanjo, a man who would later go on to be a two-time president of Nigeria. Operation Tailwind would ultimately break the deadlock. After over 3 weeks of heavy fighting, the last two major strongholds of Owerri and Uli fell to the Nigerian forces. Unwilling to go down with the Biafran ship, General Ojukwu fled by plane to the Ivory Coast, leaving behind his deputy Philip F. Young to negotiate the terms of Biafra's surrender to General Yakubu Gowon on the 14th of January 1970.
The so-called rising sun of Biafra is set forever. It will be a great disservice for anyone to continue to use the word Biafra to refer to any part of the East Central State of Nigeria. The tragic chapter of violence is just ended. We are at the dawn of national reconciliation. Once again, we have an opportunity to build a new nation. You will have heard that my government may seek the assistance of friendly foreign governments and bodies, especially in the provision of equipment to supplement our national effort. There are, however, a number of foreign governments and organizations whose so-called assistance will not be welcome. These are the governments and organizations which sustained the rebellion. They are thus guilty of the blood of thousands
who perished because of the prolongation of the futile rebel resistance. They did not act out of love for humanity. Their purpose was to disintegrate Nigeria and Africa and impose their will on us.
To say that the Nigerian government did not do enough to bring healing and reconciliation in the years following the war would be a gross understatement. Even the federal troops that were deployed to assist in the resettlement of the survivors of the war would be accused of taking advantage of the people that were there to help.
I have complaints about the behavior of your troops. Many women say they've been molested and raped. Men say their property has been taken away from them, looted. Do you know anything about this?
I don't think that is true to say general looting and raping and rest of it. That couldn't be true. You know, in every war, there's always one or two odd soldiers who will behave in the out of the general pattern. And well, I won't deny that there will be cases of this. And you do realize that it's not very easy for officers to be there all the time to check this type of thing. But everything has been done to keep the soldiers out of the villages, out of the roads, out of the towns.
But here in the center of this town, Colonel, I've personally seen soldiers taking household gear away from people's homes, loading it onto trucks and driving away. A sergeant major stopped one truck and made them take some stuff off.
That sometimes we carry refugees with their belongings from the towns to the villages. Yeah. This could be. But
this was just property being taken out of a house, furniture, a bedstead, among other things.
Well, that might be one of the cases, the few odd cases I've talked about. But there are always people around who will check this type of thing, you know.
Have the federal troops behaved badly since they came here? Have they beaten people?
That's seizing of their things. Seizing of their properties.
They seize property?
Properties, and they're forcing some girls and ladies.
They are
forcing them.
Forcing themselves on girls and ladies?
Forcing them. Taking some wives from people try to do something they like.
Have they been killing people?
No. They don't kill civilians.
Do they bring food in with them to feed the population?
In fact, they don't. We are starting since 3 days now. I haven't taken anything.
You're hungry?
You're hungry. Very, very. Even my children, you can see them in the house now, lying down. Nothing to take.
The Biafra money, when we give them, they say no. The Biafra money is of no use.
It's unused.
Do you know anything about raping or looting?
No, I know nothing about that.
What about food supplies? Is it true that the relief supplies are not coming in?
Well, we have to make a distinction between the rural areas and the towns. It is coming into the towns because it's easier to arrange for transport. But obviously, it's more difficult to get to penetrate into the rural areas.
Have
you seen any relief supplies here? Where's the feeding station? No, this is my first visit to Owerri. I'm living about 8 or 9 miles away.
People here say that there isn't such a center.
Well, I've just come from the police barracks, and they are distributing food every day down in the police barracks to the people.
Through the police, not the Nigerian Red Cross.
The war had left millions of Igbos homeless, bereaved, and unemployed. To make matters worse, Nigeria had changed its currency during the war, and so the many Easterners who still held the old Nigerian currency were left in a very precarious position. The man who was tasked by the Gowon administration to rectify the problem was the former opposition leader, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who at the time was Nigeria's Commissioner of Finance. His solution was to simply award every Easterner a grand total of 20 Nigerian pounds, regardless of how much money he or she had in their bank accounts prior to the war. For obvious reasons, this policy was seen as a deliberate attempt to cripple the economic recovery of the Igbo middle and upper classes. It was also at this time that the Gowon administration passed the controversial indigenization decree, which basically forced all foreign-owned companies operating in Nigeria to sell a proportion of their shares to Nigerian citizens. With many Igbos left with just 20 Nigerian pounds to their name, the main beneficiaries of the indigenization policy were the wealthy Yoruba and Hausa Fulani elites. Even till today, the wealth of a few of Nigeria's most prominent Hausa, Fulani, and Yoruba families can be traced all the way back to shares that were acquired under Gowon's indigenization policy. A whole 50 years have now passed since the end of the Civil War, but the ghost of Biafra continues to haunt the Nigerian state. Just 1 year after the death of General Ojukwu in 2011, a group known as the Indigenous People of Biafra, or IPOB for short, became the latest among several post-war Biafran secessionist movements that have tried to lead a second Biafran breakaway. The response from the Nigerian government has again been very heavy-handed, showing how little has been learned from the mistakes of the war. The IPOB leader, Nnamdi Kanu, has been arrested and harassed numerous times by the Nigerian state, which has only helped to energize his base and build his cult-like following. The Biafran question now occupies a menacing position in Nigeria's political terrain, and with each passing day, it is becoming very clear that the Nigerian government can no longer continue to sweep the matter under the carpet. The IPOB are not the only independence movement threatening to break the Nigerian Union. The oil-rich Niger Delta region, which despite being the source of Nigeria's wealth, remains one of the most underdeveloped regions in the country, has for many years been riddled with militant separatist groups such as the Niger Delta Avengers and the Niger Delta Greenland Justice Mandate. Similarly, for many years, a number of groups in the Yoruba heartlands have been calling for the creation of a separate Yoruba state that would be known as the Oduduwa Republic. The one thing that unites all of these groups is the strong belief that nothing has really changed since colonial times. In other words, the only group that still has a vested interest in the continuity of the Nigerian Union are the northern elites. And in all honesty, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand why this view is so prevalent. There is no doubt that a breakup of Nigeria would most likely lead to economic ruin for a lot of rich and powerful northerners who could potentially find themselves left behind in a landlocked country with no access to the sea, no oil revenue, and a large undereducated population, of which an estimated 50% of women have no formal education. When Frederick Lugard created Nigeria back in 1914, it was arguable that he had no idea how badly the Nigerian project would turn out. But what has become very clear over a century later is that Nigeria in its current state just does not work. For a country as large and as diverse as Nigeria, the concentration of power in the Nigerian federal government is a recipe for disaster. With large sections of its population continuing to express feelings of marginalization and disconnection from the federal government, many have been putting forward the very sensible case for a restructuring of the country in a way that devolves power from the federal government to the various regions. This would mean giving each region power over their own resources and a greater ability to decide their own destinies. But while the idea of devolving powers from the federal government may be good for Nigeria as a whole, it would obviously mean a loss of power for those who benefit under the current system. For obvious reasons, these vested interests are the biggest stumbling blocks preventing any sensible conversation about the state of the nation. For the sake of the many innocent and peace-loving Nigerians, one can only hope and pray that the Nigerian establishment chooses to loosen its tight grip on power before it's too late. Once again, it's KB Taiwo for New Africa. If you've enjoyed
us. Please, can we give him another round of applause? Well, I think Shehu is a true son of his father. But one of the very fundamental points made by him is the role of imperialism in the affairs of our country. And don't deceive yourself that those who are parading themselves as rulers of Nigeria in Abuja are the people in charge of our country. The IMF and the World Bank today are giving the budget of Nigeria before it is read to all of us. And we have just been told that 16 trillion naira budget presented by the government. 6 trillion, the government is going to take loans to fund the budget, to pay salaries, and to enjoy themselves. But we have just sent a letter. I belong to an organization, the People's Alternative Political Movement. We just sent a letter last Friday to the Attorney General of the country. You guys, based on the judgment of the Supreme Court, the federal government wrote to 6 oil companies, we call them International Oil Company, IOCs, to the effect that for 18 years, you did not pay certain profits to the government. And how much? $62 billion. Oh yes. The Attorney General wrote to the oil companies, please, can you pay up? Another minister, Mr. Demprez Silva, said, nobody can pay this kind of money. We are going to negotiate and beg them to see what they can give us in our country. With the point we are making, if you have $62 billion today in this economy, we won't take a loan. We'll have money for education, for health, for fixing our roads and the rest of them. And that is the point being made. Ours is not a poor country. We are ruled by poverty of ideas. It's not about poverty of people. It's poverty of ideas. Show me the point. We need to get organized. Organization is vital. If we are organized, we can defeat the enemies of Nigeria. Another agency of the government came up last week. We didn't read the report. NEITI. That is the agency set up to monitor the extractive industry. That body said that 177 companies are owing the government $6.8 billion. Again, we have written to the government. Can we know these companies? Can we help us? Can we help you to go to court to recover the money? They haven't replied us because they don't want to collect the money. So the point, therefore, is that our country has no business with poverty. I'm going to call on Nadi to speak to us. Tony, it's your turn.
Good morning, if it's morning in your area, afternoon. You may have seen Fela, you may have heard about Fela. I happen to have interacted with those who interacted with Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, Chief Anthony Enohoro. The stories he told me about what Fumilayo led other women to do will almost diminish what Fela did to that of a gentleman trying to, Fumilayo will take action before she tells you what the quarrel is. Ask the Alake of Egbaland in those days. There's another associate of mine and of the project, Professor Wole Soyinka. When we came to the point of being finally conquered by those who are holding us down, it took Wole Soyinka plunging into the middle to bring us to where we had a consensus to plan again on what to do to bring ourselves out of bondage. Pronaco. After the Pronaco, he became one of the plaintiffs that went with us to court in 2007. We finished Pronaco in 2005. Soyinka was one of my 10 plaintiffs who went to court to say we did not make the Constitution of Nigeria. And that suit that began almost innocuously has grown teeth. It will take down that monster that we've been discussing and describing from our various points of suffering, whether you were being killed in the Middle Belt, or you were crying for your resources in Niger Delta, or you were Yoruba being chased into IDP camps in Benin Republic, or you were in the East being slaughtered like a chicken. All of us are being exterminated by this one monster. And that monster is something that has legitimized itself by way of the constitution we have to obey. It was imposed by that monster. That monster is now the owner of our lands, our sovereignty, our assets. That monster is the sole custodian of all the guns in the land, whether you went to the army or police or the DSS, wherever. That monster is the one that signs off on all the things that control economic assets. So Dangote can be given half of Lagos Port to do whatever he has to do. He can be assigned oil to refine and sell to us at whatever price. The limestone of Benue can be assigned to him to use free of charge to make cement and sell to us. So there's something fundamentally wrong. And so when we begin to look at the kind of title we have here, evolution or devolution, the previous speakers had done some justice in making a distinction. But let me create a common ground upon which we build what we have to do now. Because what I came to share with us is what we can do now to end this trauma. If we listen and do it, I tell you, by the close of this quarter, by the time people are heading out for Christmas, that enemy will be on his knees, because we went out in the last 22 years to work out how to dismantle this instrument, the constitution by which that monster has legitimized itself in our spaces in the name of a Nigeria that died in 1967. And so, whether you talk about evolution or devolution, let us rule out devolution. Because devolution means you are taken from where it is to give to the, constituent units. That is reverse logic. In a federation is a union of constitutions. In a federation, it is the constituent units that donate the powers that go to the center. So if anybody is still thinking in terms of what the center will do to give to creating states, creating geopolitical zone, that person doesn't understand what we're discussing. Then for evolution, yes, the revolution we talk about, which is really the solution to the problem, is only taken from the perspective of evolution. Revolution is only about the degree of change and the speed of that change. So, if instead of taking 1,000 years, you decide to take 1 year, it is a revolution.
Us. Please, can we give him another round of applause? Well, I think Shehu is a true son of his father. But one of the very fundamental points made by him is the role of imperialism in the affairs of our country. And don't deceive yourself that those who are parading themselves as rulers of Nigeria in Abuja are the people in charge of our country. The IMF and the World Bank today are giving the budget of Nigeria before it is read to all of us. And we have just been told that 16 trillion naira budget presented by the government. 6 trillion, the government is going to take loans to fund the budget, to pay salaries, and to enjoy themselves. But we have just sent a letter. I belong to an organization, the People's Alternative Political Movement. We just sent a letter last Friday to the Attorney General of the country. You guys, based on the judgment of the Supreme Court, the federal government wrote to 6 oil companies, we call them International Oil Company, IOCs, to the effect that for 18 years, You did not pay certain profits to the government. And how much? $62 billion. Oh, yes. The Attorney General wrote to the oil companies, please, can you pay up? Another minister, Mr. Dempre Silva, said, nobody can pay this kind of money. We are going to negotiate and beg them to see what they can give us in our country. But the point we are making, if you have $62 billion today in this economy, we won't take a loan. We will have money for education, for health, for fixing our roads and the rest of them. And that is the point being made. Ours is not a poor country. We are ruled by poverty of ideas. It's not about poverty of people. It's poverty of ideas. So made a point. We need to get organized. Organization is vital. If we are organized, we can defeat the enemies of Nigeria. Another agency of the government came up last week. We didn't read the report. NEITI. That is the agency set up to monitor the extractive industry. That body said that 177 companies are owing the government $6.8 billion. Again, we have written to the government. Can we know these companies? Can we help us? Can we help you to go to court to recover the money? They haven't replied us because they don't want to collect the money. So the point, therefore, is that our country has no business with poverty. I'm going to call on Nadi to speak to us. Tony, it's your turn.
Good morning, if it's morning in your area, afternoon. You may have seen Fela, you may have heard about Fela. I happen to have interacted with those who interacted with Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, Chief Anthony Enohoro. The stories he told me about what Fumilayo led other women to do will almost diminish what Fela did to that of a gentleman trying to, Fumilayo will take action before she tells you what the quarrel is. Ask the Alake of Egbaland in those days. There's another associate of mine and of the project, Professor Wole Soyinka. When we came to the point of being finally conquered by those who are holding us down, it took Wole Soyinka plunging into the middle to bring us to where we had a consensus to plan again on what to do to bring ourselves out of bondage. Pronaco. After the Pronaco, he became one of the plaintiffs that went with us to court in 2007. We finished Pronaco in 2005. Soyinka was one of my 10 plaintiffs who went to court to say we did not make the Constitution of Nigeria. And that suit that began almost innocuously has grown teeth. It will take down that monster that we've been discussing and describing from our various points of suffering, whether you were being killed in the Middle Belt, or you were crying for your resources in Niger Delta, or you were Yoruba being chased into IDP camps in Benin Republic, or you were in the East being slaughtered like a chicken. All of us are being exterminated by this one monster. And that monster is something that has legitimized itself by way of the Constitution we have to obey. It was imposed by that monster. That monster is now the owner of our lands, our sovereignty, our assets. That monster is the sole custodian of all the guns in the land, whether you went to the army or police or the DSS, wherever. That monster is the one that signs off on all the things that control economic assets. So Dangote can be given half of Lagos Port. to do whatever he has to do. He can be assigned oil to refine and sell to us at whatever price. The limestone of Benue can be assigned to him to use free of charge to make cement and sell to us. So there's something fundamentally wrong. And so when we begin to look at the kind of title we have here, evolution or devolution, the previous speakers had done some justice in making a distinction. But let me create a common ground upon which we build what we have to do now. Because what I came to share with us is what we can do now to end this trauma. If we listen and do it, I tell you, by the close of this quarter, by the time people are heading out for Christmas, that enemy will be on his knees, because we went out in the last 22 years to work out how to dismantle this instrument, the constitution by which that monster has legitimized itself in our spaces in the name of a Nigeria that died in 1967. And so, whether you talk about evolution or devolution, let us rule out devolution. Because devolution means you are taken from where it is to give to the, constituent units. That is reverse logic. In a federation is a union of constitutions. In a federation, it is the constituent units that donate the powers that go to the center. So if anybody is still thinking in terms of what the center will do to give to creating states, creating geopolitical zone, that person doesn't understand what we're discussing. Then for evolution, yes, the revolution we talk about, which is really the solution to the problem, is only taken from the perspective of evolution. Revolution is only about the degree of change and the speed of that change. So, if instead of taking 1,000 years, you decide to take 1 year, it is a revolution that you could move away from something that took so long to build. You could reduce it to 1 week. You could reduce it to 1 hour, where you now go straight to the palace, behead a few people, and take charge, and become the sovereign. And so, what we have to do is of a revolutionary nature, but there's a process that will manage all of what could go wrong, which was why we drew up a plan that took so long. Technical, please bring the battle script of 1960 so that we can see where this monster is coming from. If we understand where it's coming from and what is done to bring us to this enslavement that go to everything. We can't generate electricity for ourselves. Not that we don't have the capacity. Somebody who doesn't want electricity for us wrote it down that we cannot generate electricity. It's called exclusive list. No, the one in red. Good. That is what we are dealing with. That is what has become the constitution that we have to obey. That the people who were handed over this territory by their joint venture partner Britain in 1960 were telling their left that the territory, which includes Yoruba land, Ijo land, Igbo land, Tiv land, Berom land, must be an estate of their great-grandfather Uthman Danfodio. On no account should there be a change of power. That they will use the minorities of the north, that's the middle belt as we have it today, as willing tools. The Gowons of this world, the Danjumas of this world, the Husainis of this world, Jeremiah. And that the south will then be a conquered territory. Never allow them rule over us. Never allow them control over their own future. If you bring the map of Nigeria, and you can, technical, bring the alliance map, you can see, in perspective, how that instruction has been executed. No, the other map. Good. You see the territory in yellow. That's the 12 contiguous states that have imposed Sharia. And the territory in white is the balance of Nigeria, the south and the middle belt. That instruction you saw there was the basis of all of what was done to impose this constitution that tie our hands to the back and seize our sovereignties. Like doctors who do, you go from diagnosis to prescription to treatment. If you miss the diagnosis, some say, oh, it's leadership. Let's go get better people to come to lead us. No matter who you bring to govern Nigeria now or manage Nigeria with this constitution, that person will fail. Because it's like asking them to go to fetch water with basket, the type you used to bring tomatoes from Jos. If I cannot generate my electricity, I cannot do the road from my state capital to the other capital because it's federal asset. I cannot defend myself, organize my own security. I have the capacity to, but I'm being prevented by those who imposed the instrument. There are 68 such items. I can't even elect who will govern me because there's an INEC in Abuja, in a federation. Imagine the day that people from Tennessee or some corner of California will have to come to New York to organize who will govern New York. That's what we've been living with. And it is in those 68 items that the oil and gas assets of the Niger Delta now belongs to people in Jigawa. It's in those exclusive lists that the Port of Lagos, which is ordinarily Yoruba assets, have been the exclusive possession of people from that other part. From independence to date, not one controller general of Yoruba origin to collect the over 2 trillion that they take from that port every year. Yet, Lagos has to join other states to go cap in hand to Abuja to beg every month. They don't get even 5% of what Nigeria takes away from here, from the port alone. You now talk about the taxes. Lagos is responsible for at least 60% of all of what they share in taxes, VAT and the other taxes. The 24 banks in Nigeria, apart from their Unity Bank, that is headquartered in Abuja, are all headquartered in Lagos. If their taxes were to be reckoned for what it should be in a federation, imagine what that alone translates to. The telecom companies and all of the companies operating here. But there's a federal government sitting in Abuja in a situation where our federation collapsed in 1967 completely. The garment, the carcass of that federation that collapsed was taken over by the man who was making that statement, the one in red, and his people. They are wearing that garment now, pretending that they are still Nigeria in place, and they imposed this instrument that now make us permanent political minority. We came into this federation as a federation of 3 regions, and one out of that 3, in fact, in 1963, Western region had to give up a part of it that became Midwestern region. By plebiscite. The 4 regions, of the 4 regions, 1 has become the 19 states and the Federal Capital Territory. That if you join the local government, they created 704 local government areas, in which Kano alone has 44. Bayelsa has 8. Lagos, that is responsible for half of urban Nigeria, whether it's human or material resources, is still to keep 20 local government areas. Whether you talk about representation or the sharing of resources or distribution of resources and opportunities, you will see that we've gone from being in control of at least each 25% to that one region has become 72% of all of what we are, including the assets that God put in our spaces. And so the nature of the problem we have to solve is that instrument that make us slaves in our land, there is nothing in apartheid constitution that is not replicated here. And it was imposed, and our signature, this is where the matter now becomes something we can deal with by ourselves. It is our signature that sustains this instrument. That preamble that says, I'm happy there are lawyers here, that preamble that says, we the people, having solemnly resolved to live in unity as one indivisible country, do hereby make and give unto ourselves the following constitution. That is the key for our escape from this dungeon. If we apply that key today, we'll be out of this whole mess, including the guns that are being pointed at us. Because it's on account of that false claim that you are called Nigeria. It's on account of that false claim that people who are after your life can come to your space pointing guns at you. It's on account of that, signature that your assets now belong to them. Everything we complain about, the corruption you think you need to go and fight, this constitution creates corruption and comprehensively protects the beneficiaries of corruption. If you want to ask me how, I will refer you to section 6, subsection 6C, that absolves government of responsibility towards you. Section 6, if there's any lawyer in this land that will want a debate on that, we ask him to come forward so that we can disgrace him in the open. Under section 6, subsection 6C of this constitution, the government does not owe you any obligation, because all the good things of life that are listed in chapter 2 for you, equal opportunity, education, healthcare, every good thing you can imagine are in chapter 2. But section 6, subsection 6C, renders it non-justiciable, leaving it at the discretion of people in government to do whatever they choose to do for you. Then they come to the appropriation provisions. They give them the spare key to the treasury. Section 81 of the Constitution says that the president must go to get permission to spend money, like other countries. But Section 82 says that while the legislature is debating that appropriation bill, he's at liberty to run government spending money subject to certain dubious limits. As it is the president in Section 81, 82, so it is for the governors in sections 121, 122. Do you know what that means? The heads of the executive branch in Nigeria have the spare key to the treasury and can take the contents of the treasury to the last bit without any form of inhibition. Nothing stops them. Then they come to section 308 that gives them absolute immunity. You can't question them for whatever they do. Between the three, they don't owe you obligation. They can take all the money and you can't question them. By the next election, their chief of staff is replacing them. The man who will go to prison, if you were to prove the previous tenure, that is who becomes the next person. And so they've managed to carry us, as if we can't think. And that was why some of us who had seen some of these things now decided to pull back from it and draw up a plan. It was a 20-year plan that was deployed the same year the Constitution came. Because it wasn't in 1999 they created the 36 states. Everything came from 1979. And that 79 came from what Murtala Muhammad commissioned before, they took him out in 76. And so, where we are now, to come to this the diagnosis. The British came and did what they did, handed over to them in 1960, and they've managed to maintain it by brigandage, toppling what we agreed in Lancaster House to impose what we now have. If we take down this, we will be free. Whether you want to be Oodua Republic, or you want the kind of federation that Awolowo had, or you want Biafra, or you want resource control, our common task at this time is to take down this instrument. We are like in a cage under this instrument. And we are put in that cage by the people who gave the instruction that we should be put in that cage. How do we take down the instrument? Practical. Until science becomes technology, you are just theorizing. I come today to tell us that generation that enacted EndSARS, this talk goes to you. If you listen now and do what needs to be done, anybody who is inviting you to come to election under this constitution is inviting you to sign off to be killed, because it's this constitution that has empowered those who can come to your space and kill you without consequence. It's this constitution that has empowered the politician that is stealing money you can't stop. It's this constitution that empowered people who can sit in Abuja and go 1, 2, 3, 4 down the list of those who scored at elections to bring a Hope Uzodinma to be governor in Imo. Imo is bleeding today. Igbo land is a festival of blood because we're in Nigeria. Yoruba has not come under that level of pressure. But if you go to the Middle Belt to see what the people who are supposed to be our compatriots in the same project are doing, they have opened our borders for their like to come from across the border to join them. They are in joint venture with ISIS. ISIS wants an operational base away from the Middle East. The man who is our president, who is also the champion of this Fulani invasion, opens our border to bring both ISIS and the Fulani that will help them to overrun the rest of us. That's what they are in a conquest mood. They are putting elections, PDP, APC, who will go first, to do what? To preside over this rape, and we are listening to them and looking at them and wanting to go with them. They are the ones who will do the PVC plastic. But while they give you plastic, they are distributing AK-47 across your local communities. They are the ones who will carry the ballot box around. They are the ones who, the niece of our president is the one controlling INEC, and we're going to election. It will be signing our death warrant to go for one more election under this 1999 constitution. What we are inviting you to do, and I speak to you now with the mandate of NINAS. Some of our compatriots from the Middle Belt couldn't get here. They are all involved in this message. We're informing you that the owners of Nigeria, and you saw them on the streets of New York 3 weeks ago, are saying to the whole world that our union has collapsed. We have defeated the constitution by which we are held down. Those who imposed that constitution are now on an attempt to conquer us afresh by extermination in order to reestablish their ownership and control. What we need to do, it is election they use to validate the life of the constitution once every 4 years. All the problems are flowing from the constitution. We all understand that. How do we now stop that cycle? If we go to another election in 2023 with them, instead of shutting down the journey, we are telling the political parties, and we can all insist, whether it's party A or party B or C that wins, the winner will swear to defend and uphold this abomination for another season. Meanwhile, every day we postpone this remedy. The ones who are approaching us with AK-47 will continue to come in the name of Nigeria. If we raise that issue in this last quarter of 2021, that we are not going to another election under this constitution, I tell you, by December, by the time people are heading for Christmas, that enemy will be on his knees begging for accommodation. If we don't, I can tell you, we are doomed.
Mrs. Carol Smith, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
May I say how delighted we are to be on Passion. We've looked forward to speaking to an African television station for decades. This is something we have looked forward to for such a long time, and we are so happy to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron Smith was a young, bright, and principled Oxford University graduate who was recruited by the Colonial Office and posted to Nigeria. He took his final examination a year ahead of his class. He also married Mrs. Carol Smith, whom he met while they were both at Oxford
Of
University.
American democracy
Together they went
in
to
an
Nigeria, where
increasingly
they had their
dangerous
2
world.
children.
This is Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, acted as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy under President Ronald Reagan, founder and president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., the go-to man for defense and foreign policy issues, joined by the greatest minds in the security policy business, the special forces in the war of ideas, at Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. One of the battlegrounds in that war, which has for far too long been neglected largely, is Africa, an immense continent with hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. One of its most important countries is Nigeria. It is situated in West Africa on the coast. It has substantial oil and gas reserves and other natural resources, and it is a country in grave turmoil at the moment. Indeed, some warn, like Congressman Frank Wolf, former member of the United States House of Representatives, of an imminent implosion in that country, with potentially incalculably awful repercussions for its people, for those of the region, for the continent of Africa, and far beyond. I had the privilege on Thursday of participating in a program that featured Nigeria. It was sponsored in part by a new organization of which I am the president and CEO, the Save the Persecuted Christians, it's called. And we were privileged to be able to convene in the company of some prominent Nigerians a second program after a rollout of ours. And you can see this at SaveThePersecutedChristians.org if you're interested in going to the video of the launch event at the National Press Club. But we also were privileged to share the stage in the second part of the program with individuals of the Nigerian American diaspora and others from Nigeria who were there to bear witness to what is happening to Christians, yes, but also to many others, including to the country of Nigeria itself, at the hands of, well, Sharia supremacists, I think is the short form of it. One of the men who presented in the course of that very impressive program was Tony Nadi. He is a barrister, that is to say an attorney by training. He is also the Secretary General of the Lower Niger Congress. And the Lower Niger Congress, as we'll be discussing with him, is an organization that has been convened to try to help both the people of Nigeria in country and their expatriate community in this and in other parts of North America to help preserve and hopefully save the Nigeria that has been in distress for quite some time, as Tony Nandi will describe for us now. Tony is an articulate and impressive advocate for freedom and for those who are at risk of losing it, both in his native land and far beyond, if the Sharia supremacists have their way. I'm very pleased to say he's agreed to be with us for a full hour to discuss this extraordinarily important topic, and I look forward to doing so with him. Tony Nadi, welcome very, very sincerely to Secure Freedom Radio. It is a delight to have you with us, and I appreciate you giving so generously of your time to discuss this important matter.
Thank you, Frank, for having me, and I welcome the audience to this important session.
Well, good. Let me start by helping those of us who may not be able to find Nigeria on the map, perhaps, or certainly understand its importance to the continent of Africa and the world, to do some level setting with you. Can you help us with first the geography of Nigeria? Where is it and what's around it?
Yes, Nigeria is in the region of Africa where you have to the Atlantic waterfront, you call the Gulf of Guinea, and then on the upper side, the Lake Chad Basin. Nigeria is sandwiched between that Gulf of Guinea. In fact, it's very much a part of the Gulf of Guinea and the Lake Chad Basin. You have Cameroon to the eastern side. You have the West Africa, the rest of West Africa, Nigeria is also now West Africa, which includes Ghana and the rest of them. And then to the north of it is these ungoverned spaces that begins with the Libya of recent, dislocation. And you have Sudan in that northern flank. You have the Sudan that boiled over only recently, hasn't quite settled. And you have Chad, you have Niger, where American soldiers were killed not long ago. And these are the places that surround Nigeria. To the northwest, you have the northern Mali, the parts that the Islamists overran Europe and but for the French intervention. So Nigeria is sitting in the middle of these places mentioned.
And if I could just interrupt you, one of the things that has characterized, I think, virtually all of the countries you've just mentioned, to say nothing of some like the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which are not too far away either, they're all in turmoil or in grave danger of, coming undone as they've existed at least to this point, which has considerable bearing on the point I think you're getting to, which is that this is a part of the world that we better be paying much closer attention to.
Yes, because of the sheer number of people that are trapped in the enclave, and we're talking about 200 million people, which also will immediately affect the immediate sub-region, the rest of West Africa. We have about 15 countries that depend entirely on what happens in Nigeria. So you could have another 50 to 60 million people to worry about. If anything goes wrong with Nigeria in less than 48 hours, the global community will be worrying about what to do with no less than 250 million refugees. I mean, people who will be running helter-skelter, in all directions. The only other thing to mention is that in that Nigeria, those who may have heard about Biafra before, because these are the same issues that led to the war the whole world had to help manage in 1967 to 1970, where the peoples of the eastern half of southern Nigeria, the ones that declared themselves the Republic of Biafra, when these Islamic forces came in genocide against them. They fought for 3 years and more than 3.5 million of them got killed. The issues that led to that fight, the forces, the very persons, human beings who led that fight, trying to eliminate the populations in the place to take over their assets, because incidentally the oil and gas assets that come from that Nigeria, because that's about the only thing the global community knows about Nigeria, that it sells oil along with a few other countries. That entire stock of that oil is in that eastern part, and these Islamic forces had come to wipe off the population to become the new owners of the assets. Of course, they've now expanded their gaze.
We have to take a short break. We will be right back to discuss more with the Secretary General of the Lower Niger Congress, Tony Nadi, right after this.
Visit us at facebook.com/securefreedom with Frank Gaffney. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. We're spending this hour on the distant shores of Africa, at least virtually, with an extraordinarily knowledgeable and articulate tour guide. His name is Tony Nadi. As I mentioned earlier, I had the privilege of being with him when he addressed a program that was sponsored, an impressive program at that, sponsored by Nigerian expats led by Dr. Shayo Ajiboye and Stephen Anada. We'll be talking more about that program in the course of this hour with Tony Nadi, but Tony is with the Lower Niger Congress, which has an arm here in the United States to help spread the word and stay in touch with the very large Nigerian American expatriate community. And Tony, you were just helping us sort of situate on the map in a zone of great and growing turmoil, unfortunately, a country of 200 million people. Tell us a bit more about the makeup of that Nigerian population, both in terms of tribes and in terms of religious denominations, persuasions.
Yes, for the global audience, it will suffice to think of Nigeria in three blocks. There is definitely the South, which is basically Christian, and the Republican in nature, not in worldview, not feudalist. And there is the far north, the part that has embraced Sharia and feudalism, and which has been on a mission of taking the entire country for itself, just like we've seen elsewhere. And that part has 12 states out of Nigeria's 36 states. Those 12 contiguous states imposed simultaneously Sharia in year 2000 and began to dislodge people and whole communities in the next adjoining territory, which is the Middle Belt. So you have to the south, you have the block to the south and the block to the Middle Belt that has Benue, Plateau, Nasarawa, Adamawa. All of these places you hear about killings in recent time. They are Christians, but they were part of the northern Nigeria.
Mrs. Carol Smith, welcome to the program.
Thank you. May I say how delighted we are to be on Passion. We've looked forward to speaking to an African television station for decades. This is something we have looked forward to for such a long time, and we are so happy to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron Smith was a young, bright, and principled Oxford University graduate who was recruited by the Colonial Office and posted to Nigeria. He took his final examination a year ahead of his class. He also married Mrs. Carol Smith, whom he met while they were both at Oxford University. Together they went to Nigeria, where they had their 2 children. Mr. Aaron Smith, you were featured in a program recently by BBC Radio 4,
yes.
Titled Document,
yes.
And that was hosted by Mr. Mike Thompson.
Yes.
You are alleged that the British government rigged the first and most important election in the history of Nigeria in 1959 in favor of the North. Am I correct?
Yes.
How long were you in Nigeria for?
From 1955 to 1960. And we were based in Lagos. I was on the staff of the Department of Labour. I was largely occupied with employment problems, all the employment exchanges, and statistics, and international reports, and was kept pretty busy. I was also stationed in Lagos in charge of the capital and the port. I was the port labour officer as well, and I also devised a port labour scheme and later a social security scheme, which was one of the first in Africa, which guaranteed workers some income after they'd finished work. It was a providence scheme. As I say, it was called the National Providence Scheme, and I was very proud to have put that on the statute book.
I was going to ask you what your role is. You've mentioned 3 important. Is there any particular name given to your office while you were there?
Just labour officer. I was a labour officer, a senior civil servant.
Okay.
I only intended to stay in Lagos initially for 2 tours of duty. Although, because of this conflict with the elections, there were difficulties, actually, government wouldn't let me leave the civil service. They were determined that I should stay in the civil service after my 2 tours. And I was offered very considerable incentives, including a knighthood, to stay and work for government. Primarily this was because I had access to state secrets. I learned, and the Governor-General himself confirmed this to me, that the elections were rigged, contrived. The intention was that the North should rule Nigeria. Even in '56, the Northern leaders were very proud and were saying, if they couldn't run Nigeria, never mind elections. They might not join Nigeria. They might leave. And we all thought, well, how would they survive? There were no industries. There's not a great deal of agriculture, some groundnuts in the north. This wasn't very practical at all. And then it was, the Governor-General seemed to be thinking that the North couldn't, even if it won an election, rule Nigeria by itself. The South wouldn't stand for that. So there had to be a partner, either the Igbos in the east or the Yoruba in the west, to team up with the North. What he didn't want was for the 2 southern parties, the Igbo and the Yoruba, to team up to form the government, because he believed the North wouldn't tolerate that and talked about leaving the federation. So as I learned, in a small way at first, but very rapidly I learned about the election fixing, and as I say, this was confirmed to me by the Governor-General. He actually said that he wanted me to know the truth because he wanted me to know how much trouble I was in.
You mentioned statistics, you were collecting figures. Yes. Is that for labor and unemployed people only, or general?
Primarily, but obviously my interest was in the population
of
generally.
Nigeria.
Yes, and Awolowo, the Yoruba leader of the action group, yep, and Chief Enaharo, they too, other people were saying, where are all these millions of people in the north? Where are they? We're going up there to campaign. We want to know, you know. And you see all these, you know, thousands of miles of not very developed countryside, and yet the northerners are claiming that their voting registration figures are larger than in the south, you know, larger, far more people up there. Well, actually, if you went through the Igbo land, you know, Enugu and that, you saw lots and lots of people. If you went to Ibadan, again, Ibadan teeming, you know, with millions of people. But we didn't actually see many northerners, and obviously not many northerners at that time came to Lagos. So this did arouse suspicion. Now, the Europeans, you know, not stupid, we are watching what's going on in Nigeria, and we too are beginning to feel there's something not quite right here, that maybe the elections are not going to be as straightforward as they're meant to be. Nigeria was being described as the showcase of democracy, and it was expected that the nationalist leaders would win through. But actually, when the election results were announced by the Governor-General, before the vote was even in, he didn't vote, didn't count for that, he didn't wait for that. I have to tell you, the British were counting the votes, and the British cannot be trusted. They look after their friends. Loyalty is the big thing for the British. And we were friends with the emirs of the north. We looked on people like Enaharo and Awolowo as rather dangerous people. They might even be communists. That's ridiculous, actually. They couldn't be communists in 1,000 years. But this was a sort of thing that was being said. And we were, Europeans, were getting a bit worried about all this. It wasn't quite the honest, straightforward election that we were hoping for.
Apart from Professor Anderson and Dr. Patrick Wilmot that supported your submission on the rigged election. There were other people who also served in the colonial office in your days. I mean, who opposed to this submission?
Initially, I was warned of what was going on by my senior officer, a Major Bunker. I didn't know, and I knew that the Governor-General had directed me to take all the office staff of the Ministry of Labour to help Chief Okoti Igbo in politicking in Warri. And this was most irregular, and I refused to do this. Having refused an order, I know what the drill is. You resign. I resign my post. That is the proper thing to do. What they did then was rather devious. They persuaded me to withdraw my resignation, and when I did, they sacked me. It didn't go through, but I thought this was a bit low after I'd resigned and was prepared to leave the country. This was not very nice behaviour. They later withdrew this and said that I had been of some service to the state, and actually commended me for what I had done, and said I could leave Nigeria with splendid testimonials, and we shook hands on this. And this was done with the recognition of the Deputy Governor-General, Sir Ralph Grey. And then I left Nigeria the first time and took up a job as a personnel officer, a very big job, with the Esso refinery. And then government came after me, declared that I was a traitor, and I had betrayed the British people, ought to be imprisoned, and I lost that job. And then they came to me again and said it's all been a big mistake, dreadful mistake. I'm a jolly decent chap, you know, Oxford chap, and they put me on a plane straight back to Nigeria, where I'd make up for the time I'd been away. There was a great deal of good work for me to do, and we fell for this. We shouldn't have gone back, but we did.
Now, if you recall what you said about the role of the Governor-General and the attitude of the British government in particular, regarding the fear that Awolowo, Okoti Igbo, and the lot of them from the south are dangerous, is there a particular reason? Is it, why the fear from the British government? Is it that they don't want to release or relinquish Nigeria? They still want to control Nigeria?
They knew that the North would do as they said after independence. If it had any, the North would just, because it was their habit, they liked the British, whereas the nationalists were an unknown factor. Actually, when they took the flag down and hoisted the Nigerian flag, not one of the major nationalist politicians was there. They weren't even on the platform. This is incredible. These were the people who had sought independence. The people in the North didn't want independence. They didn't want the British to leave. So this was a farce. And for most Europeans who were very close on watching this, we were disgusted. We thought this really had been manipulated, this election. It was unworthy. It was unworthy of the British people, this. This was no honest, straightforward thing that you would expect Britain, the mother of parliaments, to do. This was cheap and low and criminal. And I opposed it. And I opposed it then, and I've opposed it ever since. And I'm telling you the truth. And I was warned, if I told you this state secret, my life could be forfeit.
Earlier on, you said the British government wanted the North in alliance with either of the southern region, either with the Yorubas or with the Igbos.
But Awolowo,
without which they cannot
they can't do this
rule the country.
The problem was that Awolowo was a highly principled man.
Okay.
You didn't talk to Awolowo about squalid deals and fixing things. Awolowo was not that kind of person. If you read his books, this man was a world statesman. And his young lieutenant, Chief Enaharo, was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. However, they did do a deal with Zik, Dr. Azikiwe, from the East. Dr. Azikiwe, there was this big problem in Nigeria. It's the same big problem in America and in Britain. How do you get funds to fight elections? The candidates in Nigeria had no money, but they did have marketing boards, which were a kind of semi-nationalized industry. And they borrowed money from the marketing boards. But there was a suspicion that Dr. Azikiwe, who has formed his own bank, the African Continental Bank, was actually bankrupt. But he was borrowing very large sums of money from the marketing boards and not necessarily repaying the loans. We knew this. We had a great secret service. All the politicians' phones were tapped. All the politicians' mail was opened. Everything that any major politician did in Nigeria, we knew in hours. We watched. We knew all that was going on.
Are you saying, in essence, that Dr. Azikiwe took money?
He was blackmailed by the British to do our bidding. We told Dr. Azikiwe that he could go to prison if an inquiry was carried out into his bank and his financial circumstances. However, we would not want to be vindictive if Dr. Azikiwe was cooperative in helping forward the plans that we had made in the best interests of Nigeria. Dr. Azikiwe has nothing in common with the northern politicians. He loathed the northern politicians. But Dr. Azikiwe went north and did as he was told. And what he was promised was this. The real power, effective power, would be in the hands of the northern emirs. However, it would look great if the president was Dr. Azikiwe and he was given a field marshal's uniform and an admiral's uniform. He asked, please, could he have a row of medals? But they said, well, no, that was a bit difficult, to get the medals. So when the ambassadors started arriving, he was known to be asking people from foreign countries, perhaps they had a medal for his uniform. We thought this was terrible, but it was said that this happened. He was very vain. And for a time, he functioned as first the Governor General, and then when Nigeria became a republic, as the president. But he had no power. And when he did try to tell the army, he said, I'm the field marshal, the army has got to do with this. They said, hey, you're just a ceremonial figure. You have no power. The Prime Minister, Balewa, gives us our orders. So there was a feeling then that there was going to be trouble. And then it was because the Awolowo and the Action Group had become the official opposition. What we British wondered, how could they win?
You will voters card. You will voters card. Oh yeah, well. Thank you, Monsieur. You want my Maggie? You want Maggie? Onye nke a kedu bụ enyi ebe a na-eji si oji ọ dị
Boss, come now.
We still have a malice in our hearts. Oh, we lost civil war. Our parents taught us how to hate. They did not teach us love. Because of this hatred that we have deep in us, anybody who say we should love, we say that person is a saboteur. Somebody like Daniel Lindsay is seen as a saboteur because he was not born in Igbo land. He was born in Benin. So he's not a real Igbo. He's a fake Igbo because he asked you to love. Love yourself. We lost the civil war. Yes, we lost. The only revenge that we could have offered to Nigerians, like we claim we are not Nigerians or we are Biafran, the only revenge was to develop the Igbo land. But in the next 100 years, sorry to say, my fellow Igbo people, you might say I'm a fake Igbo man, whatever you like to say, but I'll tell you the painful truth. I see no development in the East. In the next 100 years, it will remain a place with no development. Even this so-called desert, they will be more developed than the Eastern region. Why? Because we fail to make our place welcoming to visitors. We fail to make our place welcoming to foreigners. No country, no state can develop without foreigners. America is what it is today because of immigrants. Canada is what it is today because of immigrants. Australia is what it is today because of immigrants. Germany, Europe there is what it is today because of immigrants. Even Lagos, Abuja is what it is today because of immigrants. Imagine if Yoruba people say they don't want Igbo, they don't want Delta, they don't want Hausa in Lagos. Lagos will not be as developed as it is. If an Hausa man or a Muslim guy, maybe an Arab person from Dubai or from Saudi Arabia, they come to invest in Igbo land. They want to take over our land. They don't want to Islamize also. This archaic mentality is why you cannot create jobs for your people. Not welcoming to foreigners. Imagine that an Imo person, somebody from Imo State cannot buy a land in Anambra State. A certain land in Anambra State cannot be bought by somebody in Imo State. More than 300 killings in Ebonyi State. 2015, over 200 to 300 killings. Communal clashes between people of Ebonyi State from the same state fighting over land. We never forget the killing of Enugu Ezike. Before we talk about what Fulani is doing to us and what Hausa is doing to us, we still have a malice in our hearts. Oh, we lost civil.
Let them know.
Thank you.